You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb, and I am fired up. What a game we witnessed on Saturday. 62-39, Ohio State pummeling that team up north. Michigan being dealt its worst loss in the history of the program, at least as far as points given up. The previous worst was 58 given up to that Cornell juggernaut back in 1891. Look, I know most of you people didn't think that Ohio State would win. I did predict, on the Thursday/Friday podcast, the part 2 of the Michigan preview, you will recall I did pick Ohio State to win 34-31 because I thought that Dwayne Haskins was going to spread that peanut butter jelly. And, boy, he really did. I mean, 396 yards passing, 20 of 31 completions, 6 touchdown passes. I thought Ohio State would win, and I wasn't really emphatic and really confident about it, but I did kind of think that they would win, only because Ohio State's passing attack was really dynamic, and there's that word, right, that buzzword that the committee has been using about Oklahoma. But lo and behold, this Ohio State team put up 400 yards passing against Michigan, and I didn't think that we knew exactly how Michigan's defense would handle that kind of a pass attack. It's not so much that I didn't believe in Michigan's defense, because I still think, despite what Ohio State did, I think that Michigan defense is legit. But this Ohio State team, and this is why I've been saying this all season long, it's like I just want people to not necessarily assume that Ohio State couldn't do it, because when push comes to shove, Ohio State has talent. And this is what we've been waiting to see. And I don't even know if it's a fluke or not. I don't know. I don't know if this was the aberration, if this was the fluke, and maybe the Ohio State team we've been seeing all year long is the real Ohio State. But you just knew that they were capable of this. We've seen flashes of it, especially offensively. They've been putting it together on offense. I'm not shocked by this. Maybe I'm a little surprised. I didn't expect a 23-point win to where they would dominate like that. I just didn't. But I'm not totally shocked that they came out and put together a complete game. The offense, I think, is legit. Look, if this Ohio State team gets to the playoff, and I'm not going to talk about the playoff a lot today, but I will talk a little bit more about it on Friday. And I'm just saying, like Bill Bender and I discussed this on Friday, Ohio State has to be the team that gives Alabama the most concern. If you're a Crimson Tide fan right now, you've got to be a little bit concerned. You may not admit it. Publicly, there's going to be a lot of hubris. There's going to be the typical Alabama, the Alabama confidence, and they've earned it. They should be confident, especially this team. This team is really good. And I'm not saying Ohio State would beat Alabama or will beat Alabama if given the chance. They're going to be like a 2-touchdown favorite if it gets to that far. If we get that matchup, if Ohio State wins against Northwestern on Saturday, which is a big if, that game's not over with. But if we get this matchup, Ohio State-Alabama, Bama will be a 14-point favorite, maybe a touch over that. Okay, it's not going to be easy. It's an uphill climb. But remember, Ohio State was a 14-point underdog against Miami in 2002, and that was one of the greatest college football teams of all time. And this Alabama team might be one of the greatest as well. So I'm not saying they aren't, but I'm just saying that Ohio State team in 2002 had no offense. They had a great defense, but they had no offense, and yet they still were able to knock off one of the greatest college football teams of all time. That was a 2-point favorite against them. So this is a similar situation, but Ohio State has to get there first. And with this offense, which I think is legit, by the way, put 62 points and 550 yards plus of total offense up against, almost 570 yards total offense against the statistical best defense in America. And you may say, well, the defense gave up 39 points, despite the fact it looked good. That's concerning. But when you really see how that game played out, the defense was just magnificent. They did everything that they need to do. Those first couple drives of the game, they held Michigan to field goals. They really made them work for everything. Michigan did not get big plays. When Michigan's best offense was the pass interference call. And on one hand, that's frustrating because it means Ohio State defensive backs were, for the most part, committing penalties and holding and grabbing. A couple of those were joke calls, but some of them were legit. Most of them were legit. But Michigan was still unable to get anything going consistently on offense, and that's because Ohio State's defense controlled the line of scrimmage. They were great up front. Malik Harrison played the game of his life. They took great angles. They tackled. They didn't over-pursue or under-pursue. The instincts were there. Even the defensive backs, they got beat a couple times, but it wasn't egregious. They were in good position most of the time. Nico Collins, that guy is a great receiver. I mean, he's not explosive. He's not real fast, but, man, he's big. He's strong. He's powerful. He's got great hands. He catches the ball. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a little bit better athlete than Nico Collins, but he doesn't have the strength and ability to go up and get the ball like Nico does. Those are good future NFL receivers for Michigan. Okay, they don't have the team explosiveness or the athletes that Ohio State does, but this was a great win for Ohio State. I don't know if the Buckeyes are going to be able to keep that up. I mean, I just don't. In 2014, when we saw it against Wisconsin with Cardale Jones at quarterback, we all said, "Wow, that's impressive." But there was still some reservation. It's like going into that Alabama game in 2014. I think every Buckeye fan had a little touch of confidence because of what they saw against Wisconsin. But there was, in the back of your mind, there was that, well, maybe this was a fluke, right? Maybe this was just a one-off thing, an aberration, just one of those days where everything came together perfectly on one day. And I still have that question about this team because when you play 11 games and then all of a sudden you come out one game differently than you had looked the rest of the season, it's fair to say, well, is this the sample size issue? Is the 11 games the real Ohio State team? Is this one game, the aberration? And I just don't know. I think it's possible that what we saw against Michigan will carry over to Northwestern, and Ohio State will come out and put it to the Wildcats. I think you will see another good offensive performance. I don't think that's a fluke whatsoever. I think we know now that this Ohio State offense is really, really good. But can the defense come out and replicate the success they had against Michigan on Saturday? That is to be determined. And that, by the way, friends, I think will be the difference in whether or not Ohio State gets into the college football playoff. Oklahoma may or may not beat Texas a second time. The committee is going to be looking at this very closely. I posted a comparison of the two, an in-depth statistical comparison on Twitter. You might want to check that out at KYLam8. I go through each opponent, the average ranks, and 4 major power ratings, the strength of record, the average win, average loss, all that stuff, offensive and defensive efficiencies. I compare the two, and they're pretty much the same team right now. Some will say, well, Ohio State's Purdue loss is a lot worse, so therefore Oklahoma would get in. Or you could look at it the other side. Ohio State has 2 better wins than what Oklahoma has because Michigan and Penn State are 2 better wins than anything Oklahoma has done. So the wins and losses may or may not even out, but it could come down to this weekend, okay? If Oklahoma loses and Ohio State wins, Ohio State is in, barring Georgia upsetting Alabama, in which that's a very sticky situation. But if Ohio State and Oklahoma both win, it could simply come down to the eye test and what happens in this game. If Ohio State puts up that kind of offensive performance, you have to assume Oklahoma is going to give up a lot of points against Texas, and they're going to score a lot of points against Texas. So it could come down to what Ohio State's defense is able to do against a top 25 Northwestern team. Because Northwestern will be in the top 25 this week of the college football playoff ratings. So it's going to come down to this. Can Ohio State's defense replicate what they did against Michigan against Northwestern this weekend. If they do, I think Ohio State will be in the college football playoff next week. If they don't, and they win, but only by a couple points in a shootout, and Oklahoma wins by a couple points in a shootout, it's going to be very, very dicey come Selection Sunday. I got Kirk and Ross coming up here in just a second, and we're going to talk some Ohio State basketball here at the end of the show. The Big Ten ACC Challenge is coming up this week. Ohio State, of course, with a 6-0 record, facing Syracuse for the first time in the Challenge. They faced Syracuse back in 2008 in the NIT, and, of course, in 2012 in Boston in the regional semis. The regional finals, and they were able to advance to the Final Four that year. So they have played Syracuse a few times here in the past 10 years, but this is the first time they played them in the Challenge. I will talk about that game here at the end of the show. But let's focus more here on what Ohio State did on Saturday against Michigan. Let's bring in Kirk and Ross and go over all of the detailed analysis of that game.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, Ross and Kirk are here as we break down an uncanny 62-39 victory for Ohio State. I don't even know how to describe it, guys. It's good to be with you. Ross is bringing you the soothing ocean sounds of the San Diego Zoo, and Kirk is just relaxing,
Kirk
chilling
is
at
just
home.
Kirk.
Just Kirk, but hopefully the ocean will be a nice little background noise to what was an amazing victory over the weekend. Guys, I don't even know how to start this. Kirk, I'll start with you. You've been, we've talked so much about what Ohio State has been or hasn't been all year long, and I know the common question after this game is, where has that been all year? In your mind, let's start big picture here. Did we see a fluke? Was this an aberration from an Ohio State team that has clearly proven itself to be not very good, or was this the real Ohio State that we've been waiting to see all year long?
To me, it was the real Ohio State because, you can't, when you have the talent that we have, and when you have it motivated, then magically you get a performance like yesterday. I just feel like our guys, we're a young team. Our quarterback's a sophomore. We got a lot of sophomores and juniors top the roster. We only had 12 seniors at senior day yesterday. So it's like a bunch of young guys that, they're finding their way. And it's not as easy. It's not like playing the Xbox video game from 5 years ago where everyone's like, oh, every year you should never lose a game and you should always shut everybody out. And it's not Madden. It's like these are real kids. And, they stepped up to the plate. They heard the doubters. And, the nicest thing about this week is they had no pressure on them. It's like Michigan has never dealt with any type of expectations, and now all of a sudden they've got their family members saying, hey, should we book which of the playoff games do you think we're going to be in? Should we book plane tickets now? Should we book hotels now? You guys are finally going to be the ones to break the streak. They had all this weight on their shoulders, and they played like it. Like Michigan played like a bunch of, dildos, and we cut it loose, and it was great.
So, Ross, how about you? Is this the Ohio State that people? It's obviously the Ohio State people have been hoping to see. Is this the Ohio State that we should expect to see? This Northwestern team is a decent test on Saturday, and I guess people are kind of. They're going to enjoy the victory for what it is, and then yet at the same time, I think people are going to wonder, will we see this Ohio State team again, or will it disappear?
Yeah, no, I think it's there. I think it's definitely at the high end of the performance. I agree with what Kirk said about the pressure and getting to play as an underdog. I also would say that it's a little different, ironically, somewhat when you play a team that's comparable to you and thinks they're good enough to just flat out beat you. You know what they're going to do. So like Michigan isn't going to come out and like some fluky coverage or play some fluky, do something on offense to like try to trick Ohio State. Basically, they're going to run their thing, and that allows Ohio State to sort of play their thing. And then when you can do that, you're not getting those big plays. But to me, the offense since the bye week has been on basically just a skyrocket trajectory between just occasionally including Haskins in the run game and reworking the run game, and then the passing game can go. And so, when you get at least competent defense, you don't give up those big explosive plays, they can really start to, turn the tide and just start racking up points.
Ross, I'll keep this with you. So, one of the things we've talked about, and you've been big on this, is that the running game does not necessarily need to go off for a huge game. It just needs to be able to run in spots effectively. And I think that is the perfect way to describe what they did against Michigan on Saturday. They wound up running for 171 yards after the Paris Campbell 75-yarder was properly ruled a pass afterwards. But they ran for 4.8 yards per carry, just shy of 5, and that was perfect for Ohio State in this game because the pass game was extremely efficient, extremely explosive. They didn't need to run a lot; they just need to be effective and keep Michigan honest. And it looks like the line showed up and played the type of game they needed to play.
Yeah, the pass set up the run for Ohio State yesterday because Michigan came out what they typically do, which is play a lot of cover one-man coverage and bring a lot of five-man pressures to stop the run. And they had no chance. Once the offense, everything started with the pass protection. Once the offensive line gave Haskins time, Michigan just doesn't have the athletes and the safeties and linebackers to cover Campbell and Hill and those guys on crossing routes. And so Michigan then had to adjust and start playing, more cover two, more trading off wide receivers, basically keeping their linebackers in the middle to stop those crossing routes. And then, Ohio State got some advantageous numbers. And, Mike Weber can occasionally bounce a ball that he shouldn't, but he's definitely the more explosive runner. And he was able to break some of those off. And, Ohio State had a nice running game plan of using a lot of split zone, a lot of wham to basically take advantage of Michigan's aggressiveness.
And Kirk, how about that offensive line? Kirk, Ross mentioned the pass protection. Haskins was not sacked a single time. I don't even think he was touched behind the line of scrimmage of this game, and I could be wrong on that, but I don't think he was even touched. It was just amazing pass protection by the Buckeyes against that pretty good Michigan pass rush that was among the leaders in hurries in college football.
Well, I don't know what else to say about that performance yesterday. It was one of the best in the history of the game, if not the best. Other than a couple of silly penalties like a pre-snap and a couple, a personal foul by Malcolm. It was just one of those amazing performances. And, all we heard about was Rashawn Gary, and I don't even know if he had a tackle yesterday. And then, Chase Winovich, who is like Mr. Conor McGregor, and he's got like this relation. I kept saying like Conor McGregor is great, but until he runs into Khabib. And yesterday our guys were Khabib. Like we didn't talk a lot of shit. We didn't wear hoodies and dye our hair fucking orange and all that stuff. But our guys came and they whooped it. And that's, and I give credit to Isaiah Prince, who has been, just beaten to death in his career here, for stepping up and shutting them out. Him and Thayer threw shutouts versus two guys that are probably going to be first team All Big Ten. So, you can't say enough about that performance. And I was just so happy, that we could whoop. I got so sick of hearing about Captain Kangaroo, their defensive coordinator. Like, I literally just I got so sick of hearing about this guy because it's like, he's the greatest coordinator in the world and number one defense. And I'm like, and I always go back to who have they played? Penn State without Trace McSorley. They lost to Notre Dame when they had Winthrop as their quarterback, or Winbush or Windenbush or Lindenberger or whatever his name is. It's like before they put the good quarterback in, they still lost. But they still just wax poetic about these guys. A bunch of guys who don't know anything about football, like all the College Game Day guys are clueless. I sit there and I'm like, oh my God, like are you guys watching the same team I am? It's like, we still have better athletes than anybody we play against, save maybe Alabama. And it just, I didn't think that the mental hurdle that these players had could be overcome, and it wasn't. Like these guys, they played their worst game of the year, and we beat their ass, so it was good.
Well, Ross, this was a really, really good performance from Ohio State from the offensive coaching standpoint as well, because this is a game where we truly saw the Ohio State offense. We said all along that Michigan had not played a dynamic offense, so there was still some wait and see to this as to how they would respond when they played a legitimate offensive attack like Ohio State. But what I loved about this game from an Ohio State perspective is that the coaches came out and not only did they attack Michigan early with their, vulnerable spots, the crossing routes, the mesh routes, the over the middle stuff, but then as Michigan adjusted, they really started attacking the weak spots on the field for Michigan. Number 28 in the defensive backfield, they're doing the wheel routes on the linebackers. They were really looking for the places that they could attack Michigan, and I thought it was just a brilliant offensive game plan for the Buckeyes.
Yep, they were one step ahead, as you said. It wasn't even just the crossing routes. They were using bunch formations, and, that first drive, it was whoever was the advantageous matchup, that was the crosser. So one time it was McCall, the next time, it was Olave on for the first touchdown. And then, as you said, Michigan sort of changed it up to try to have their linebackers sit there and stop those crossers. And then you hit the wheels, you hit follow pivot routes, you hit, Paris Campbell on the jet sweep, because Michigan's linebackers are just sitting there waiting for the crossers. And so they just couldn't get out there to stop him. So they were, as I said, one step ahead. And then, in the short yardage, other than Martell, they were able to generate points by they had that nice little counter option where Michigan crashed down, thinking it was type zone. They threw the ball a couple times on play action and short yardage. So yeah, they were one step ahead of Kirk's favorite defensive coordinator.
Kirk,
Kangaroo.
Kirk, how about Chris Olave? We there's the old cliche, this rivalry, breeds new stars. Guys, step out and often these games are won by people you don't expect to be the hero. And Chris Olave was the hero. 2 touchdowns there in the first half, and then the blocked punt that led to a touchdown in the third quarter. Olave was just absolutely stellar for the Buckeyes, and the fact that he's just a freshman, it gives Ohio State fans some real hope for this guy being a real star. Obviously, he's getting playing time, unfortunately, because of Austin Mack's injury. But, man, he's making the most of it when he needed to.
Yeah, and it's, it's funny how, it's funny because Baby Nevada is with me right now, saying with me. He literally is like, what do you think was the biggest play of the game? I was like, block punt. Not even close. You block a punt. There's some dumb stat where you win 93% of the time if you block a punt. So it's and we hadn't been going after him as much as we had in the past. And Urban was so damn excited at the press conference to talk about it because Parker Fleming, who's our QC, who I used to work with, who came back he went to Texas State with Withers, and then he came back to be a QC again for Urban. Him and Schiano drew up that punt where Olave wrapped around, and it was literally like you couldn't even get that with the scout team. The way they hit it was perfect. And Urban was so excited at the press conference that he revealed our block punt signal. He called it because he said, I call it black, 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 and he's like, ooh. I didn't say that. I meant block, and I'm like, oh damn, Urban. I was like, well, I'm sure you can change it to Blanche or something. It's not. Signals aren't really that hard to pick up, but they still got to block it. But it was just one of those magical moments. It reminded me honestly a lot of when Malik Hooker, and Raekwon got to Wilton's spite and matched his hand. Wilton went back to pass it, and he's righty, and Raekwon matched his hand and hit his arm, and the ball flew up in the air, and then Malik Hooker picked it and ran it in. It was one of those moments when you're just like, oh shit, Michigan's in trouble, because you're not expecting that. And then when you get that quick strike, a defensive or special team score, those are game changers, man. And it's momentum changers. And, I was just, the thing I was happiest the most about is that we really poured it on and that people will forget the DeMario McCall miscue. Because I really felt bad for that kid because that was like a Ryan Hamby moment where you're just like, oh my God, if we lose this fucking game, that's going to be the thing that everyone's going to remember is DeMario. And I was just happy for that kid that we ended up blowing him out and everyone's feeling good.
Yeah, Ross, I think I think Kirk is on the money there. I think that block punt, I felt like the game was over at that point. Even though it was only, I think it was 34-19 after that punt. I thought that was the moment Ohio State's going to win this game because Michigan was not the same after that. They came out with bad body language on the next drive. They just... Offensively, they just didn't have it. Of course, that's the crowd was in the game. The defense was amped up. They wound up reviewing that. I think on the next possession, they reviewed that targeting that didn't get called a targeting, thankfully, because I was going to go ballistic if it did. And then the very next play, Chase Young hits Shea Patterson's arm, and then they get the interception. And then by then, the wheels start coming off. But you could tell, I thought, after that punt, that Ohio State was going to win that game because Michigan's body language was just not the same after that. The crowd was into it. It just felt like it was about to become a frenzy.
I agree, although I would say that the way Ohio State was moving the football, they were going to win that game before that, even if they don't block that punt, because Michigan had no answers for the Ohio State offense. Ohio State could have scored pick a number and scored it yesterday. And between that and Michigan's offense, I mean, they moved the ball some. I mean, there was every ticky-tack pass interference was called, but it was the first team between stopping the boundary run and then the first team really that has tested the Ohio State defensive line by dropping back in deep pass sets. And Ohio State was able to consistently get pressure with 4. I mean, Patterson was running for his life and frankly made some nice plays just to get rid of the football. And so, that play was huge. It definitely negated the McCall mistake at the very least. But, I'm sure when you look at like the S&P success rate, Ohio State's will blow it out of the water.
Kirk, Ohio State defensively, this is, you look at just quickly and you see 39 points and you're like, Ohio State defense, it seemed like they played really well, but they still gave up 39 points. But honestly, that was a misleading 39 points because I never felt like the defense was giving up that many. If it were a lower scoring game, I felt like Ohio State defense would have given up less. And, 7 of those were off of the DeMario McCall flop there in the first half. And then Michigan had a garbage touchdown also, but really the Ohio State defense gave about 5 yards per play, and they had as many penalty yards, 150, as Michigan did rushing, 160 on 40 carries. Yeah. When push comes to shove here, Ohio State did exactly what it needed to do on defense, and it did not give up the big plays, which is the big difference from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where the guys, I think it was a combination of, the guys got it together. I think that Michigan's offensive scheme was helpful just because they weren't like a spread team that had like a dynamic Rondell Moore type guy. And I think our guys just, played the way they knew they could play. I mean, it's, Michigan's O-line's got a lot of hype because of, their alleged improvement, but, we've whipped those guys for years, so it's like when, Chase gets out there and Draymond, he's like, these are the same guys I've already played and whipped on. And the big thing about that blocked punt that you spoke about earlier is that, I don't think that Michigan's guys were convinced they could really win. It's like, and I felt like a lot of their fans even yesterday, they thought it was like a coronation, and they showed up and they got their asses kicked. So it's like, I just, I credit the defense because they've taken so much garbage for the whole year. And, and the thing about this team is, I know that it's been, some people, have been upset about it, but, they find a way to win. It's weird. It's a lot like 0-2, other than the Purdue game, which was a complete, outlier. It's, they've found ways to win, which is in college football. It's important because, sometimes it's going to be ugly, and sometimes like Maryland was ugly, but yesterday was pretty nice. And it's, I know one thing, if I'm Bama, I don't want to play us. Give me Notre Dame or Oklahoma, but I don't want to play our guys because, Chase Young's been hurt. He gets healthy, and Draymond, our front's up there. Our secondary's, getting a little better. I mean, we're still giving up too many big plays, but offensively, man, I don't want to play us. You got to be crazy.
I said this with Bill. I don't know if you guys heard this, but on the Friday show, I said this with Bill Bender. We were talking about this. Like, we still think Ohio State, if it plays to its potential, is the team Alabama would not want to face as that 4 seed. That's the team that could actually take them down. Ross, you and I were talking about, so much has been made about the boundary runs, and that's where Ohio State has been killed. And in this game, Ohio State was sensational, and it's not that Michigan didn't try because they went to the boundary a lot, but they just didn't have any success outside of like maybe a 12 and a 15-yarder. Ohio State really bottled up that short side run game, and Michigan, I thought that they tried too much to stick with the run, and it just clearly wasn't working. And I know that they didn't have a lot of success with their pass game in this game, but they really just played, I thought, into Ohio State's hands.
Yeah, and again, it goes to my earlier point about like when you're a good team, you think you're going to do what we do, and Michigan's run the ball like 70% of the time this year on first down. It's very high, so it's hard. It's probably hard for them to change their identity. But yeah, Ohio State, we talked about this last week that rather than having Pete Werner way out over the slot like they did against Maryland, they had him closer to the box. They slanted a lot to the boundary. They had Malik Harrison basically mirror the running back and kind of loop around. And he played great. I mean, I've never seen him fill holes like that. And so, that alone, I mean, they just rendered Michigan one-dimensional. And again, even when those 15-yarders, instead of Brendan White flying up and getting beat, he took good angles, and that's, 15 yards, you'll give it to him occasionally, as long as it's not 80.
Yeah, Malik Harrison, we do need to talk about him some more. Kirk, we've been waiting a long time for Malik Harrison to put it together like he did on Saturday. What causes a guy to just all of a sudden it clicks like that? We haven't seen him play. I don't think we've even seen him do more than one or two plays a game the way he looked on Saturday. So what causes a guy to click just all of a sudden and put that kind of a game together?
It's weird, but I just think that sometimes it's the emotion of the game, or it's your parents are. And I know it's going to sound all weird and corny, but like it reminds me of like a guy like you guys have. You probably remember the name Andre Tyree.
Yeah,
he was a big fat guard who in 05 was a senior. He had never started a game, never played. And for some unearthly reason, like Jim Bowman's like, well, we're going to play him at tight end this week against Michigan. And we're going to play unbalanced and make him number 96. And he's going to hold the point and block. And like, dude, Andre Tyree kicked Alan Branch's ass all over the field in 2005. And like, nobody ever heard of him. Like nobody, like who the hell is this guy? It's like this little short, fat dude, but he was strong and he got his hands in, man, and he was killing guys. And like, we ended up coming back and winning the game and stuff. It's weird. Like sometimes guys just pop up and they play great in that game. And, it's one of those things where I was happy for our linebackers, especially because I know they've taken a lot of garbage. But, the whole time, like, it's like I've been talking with you guys and Givler. I'm like, we've got guys that can play. It's like all that's got to do is click on. Like it's not like we're just, recruiting a bunch of athletes who've never played linebacker. We got guys that can play. It's just like, all of a sudden it's just like that switch needs to flick and all of a sudden, we're good. And, I think that the guys finally got motivated, which is number one. They finally were excited to play a game. And it wasn't like noon against Maryland, or it wasn't, at Purdue, which is like the worst stadium in the universe. I mean, they were excited to play and it showed, and they were amped up and they ran through them.
Ross, if there's one negative in this game, it is the penalties. And, there were a few of these were totally bogus. Like the call on, I think it was Okuda, where he had his arm hooked going down the field, and he got called for the pass interference. That was a terrible call. The face mask on, was it Chase Young? No, it was Jonathan Cooper. The face mask on Jonathan Cooper was bogus. And that really irritated me because the ref threw that with, basically Shea Patterson's back turned to him. And so it tells me he had to guess on that face mask, and he still threw the flag. So not every penalty that Ohio State had was legitimate, but they still had 150 yards and penalties. And it was kind of funny because, we were joking that Michigan's offense, the best play they were running was the pass interference play, because that was the only thing that they had successfully that they were getting. Is there anything that Ohio State's defensive backs can do, or do you think should do going forward to eliminate this problem? Because they were still, even if some of them weren't legitimate, they were called for too many pass interference calls to be successful going forward if they get to the playoff.
Honestly, probably not, because Sheffield kind of is who he is at this point. And Michigan's wide receivers are legit. They're big dudes. Peoples-Jones, Collins, those are big dudes. And if a ref is going to call a game that tight, it's really hard to handle a 6'3", 220 dude without touching him at all running down the field. And some of them were legit, some of them were not. I thought the refs were overall pretty poor in that game. But I think you have to accept that, like, Ohio State, I think Okuda is becoming a very good corner. I think Sean Wade's quickly becoming a very good defensive back. But I think we have to accept that, like, Ohio State's not going to be like a shutdown defense in the back seven. It is kind of is what they basically just need to play like they did yesterday, which is like you render a team pretty one-dimensional. You don't give up big plays, and you let that offense go, because that offense can do some things.
Well, and Kirk, I think part of that, too, is part of the recipe for success is that, they're not going to have necessarily a shutdown performance in the secondary, but we finally saw, I think, the pass rush from Ohio State that we had been expecting to see and has been kind of dormant for a few weeks. I felt like they really asserted themselves up front a lot better in this game and got more pressure, and that's, I think, what we need to see from Ohio State next week against Northwestern, and then if they get to the playoff, definitely beyond.
Yeah, I think Coop played the game of his career so far, which was huge. And, I think that, Chase Young's been really banged up for the second half of the year, which is why since Penn State he hasn't been nearly as productive as he was in that game. But, the thing I kept thinking, and I told Tim May this, I'm like, look, if we had Nick Bosa yesterday, he might have won the Heisman because like their right tackle couldn't block me, and I'm an old white guy that plays Overwatch on Xbox. That's my pass rush move, and like that guy couldn't have blocked me. I promise you. Like Nick Bosa would have ate that guy's face, and it would have been so bad. I mean, and it's like one of those things where I'm just happy that Coop stepped up and played great, and Draymond should be the D lineman of the year in this conference because there's no one has been nearly as good as Draymond's been. So I've been enjoying that.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I would add one thing, I thought actually the key was Landers and Devon Hamilton at one technique totally dominated the run on the inside.
Absolutely.
I mean, they would reset the line and then shed and make tackles.
I love those guys. Like BB, I love these little stumpy Ohio dudes that we take late that end up being ballers.
Kirk, I'll stay with you on this first. I want to ask you, if you're a Michigan fan, what are you feeling right now? I mean, this was the team that was supposed to come in and finally beat Ohio State. They were 5-point favorites. They're now going to go 20 years at least between victories in Columbus. This was a 10-1 team, best statistical defense in the country, and they come in and give up the most points they've ever given up in school history. It's like, what do you do?
Good.
So, Kirk, I got to ask you. So, if you're a Michigan fan right now, this was the team that was supposed to get over the hump, 5-point favorites. They're now going to go 20 years without beating Ohio State and Columbus, at least 20 years. What are you feeling right now? Is Jim Harbaugh, does he go into the next season being on the hot seat? What are you feeling right now if you're Michigan? It's just, it's hard to fathom. Like, Jim Harbaugh was supposed to be the guy for this program and the savior, but they're 0-4 against Ohio State, and they're not going to sniff a Big Ten title, at least for another year. It's just, I mean, like, in their shoes, what should people be feeling right now? It's incredible.
Do you know who Tekashi 6ix9ine is, the rapper who's got like the pink and yellow hair and stuff? It's like, it's kind of like being him in a federal prison. I mean, it's like, because he's the guy like pisses off like the Crips, the Bloods, Chief Keef. He raise double middle fingers to every gang, and all of a sudden you're in prison with all these guys. Like, ooh boy, he's probably walking a little loose right now. But it's just one of those things where it's tough because you just don't know what's the answer. Like, I mean, before the answer was always like, maybe we can get Jim Harbaugh back because he's the savior and he took the 49ers to the Super Bowl. And it's like, I don't know who their next hire would even be. I mean, that's the thing is like, and you're so deep with Harbaugh because you gave him so much money. It's like, you're paying this coaching staff a ridiculous amount of money. Like, they have $3 million coordinators, and it's like they're getting, Baltic results for paying boardwalk prices. So I don't know. It's one of those things where I love it because I hate those snobby assholes, and I'm just happy that they're sad, and it makes me smile and skip every day. I'm just so happy that they're miserable.
So, Ross, I know we gotta wrap things up here. I'll give you one final question here before you go. This game in a lot of ways kind of reminded people of the 2014 Big Ten championship game. Now, there are some differences, obviously, but, they beat Wisconsin 59-0. They beat, Michigan 62-39. But this was a similar thing in that, this was a game that got people's attention and then kind of showed what Ohio State was actually capable of doing. And they still have one more game to go before a potential playoff berth. But I feel like this is, a striking similarity. Do you think that this team is ready to go forward and play like that again and get itself into a playoff? Or will this be just a one-off, in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, I think they can certainly do it, without predicting it. You never know. But I would think that if they can go and put another good performance together, I still would find it very hard to believe that a 12-1 Big Ten champ, Ohio State, doesn't get into the playoff, particularly because Ohio State's going to have 2 wins, the Michigan and then at Penn State, that are going to be better than anything Oklahoma has this year.
All right, well, thanks for Ross. He's got to go now. Thanks for him joining the show, and we'll, of course, be back with him next week, as well as Kirk, as we break down the Big Ten championship. Kirk, I want to wrap this up with you then, kind of the same question. So what do you expect to see from Ohio State going forward, and do you think when push comes to shove, if they beat Northwestern? I know we can talk about this more next week, as we preview Actually, the selection show will already be done by the time we record next week. So I'll just ask you to project. Do you think Ohio State puts on another good performance against Northwestern, and do you think it'll be enough to get them into the playoff?
Well, I think they do, just because, here's the thing. I mean, the biggest thing we got to guard against is our guys looking at the schedules and the past, few games. Because, I mean, if you look at Northwestern, I mean, they beat Illinois, which is the worst team in the universe, like 24-16 yesterday. So, our guys can't get all, we'll run the train on these guys just because we're Ohio State and we have athletes. And we very well should, but, I mean, they got to come out with that same intensity, because the biggest Achilles heel of this team is they've played so many games this year. They just have looked like it's the last place on earth they want to be. Like when they played in West Lafayette, it was like literally that was like being on that field was like being at like a study table for a midterm or a final or something. It was like the last place on earth they wanted to be at. And I'm like, yesterday they finally played, or it was like TCU. They played like they wanted to be there. It's like there's just some games where it's like and it's got to be consistent. It can't just be start fast and then take a nap and then kind of finish and put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's legit like go hard the entire game, and we finally did that. And Michigan's got they've got good players. They got guys, most of the guys they have on the roster are guys that we at least recruited, and a lot of them are ones that we offered and wanted. So we're playing equal talent finally, and our guys showed up. And I think the fact that these older guys, I mean, this is their last ride. And there's the Rose Bowl is great, but there's a big ass difference between the Rose Bowl and the playoffs. Because playoffs, you can actually get what you really want. The Rose Bowl is just like the consolation prize. And, to me, it's like, you want to, it sucks it's this way, but man, it's all about, numbers. And, everyone's going to be talking about that 59-0 against Wisconsin that we put up, and magically we got in. And, we got to root for Texas, and we got to root for us to lay one on them. And then, let the committee do their fate. And the thing that sucks is the committee's full of a bunch of people that are absolutely clueless about football. So it's just like, you're at the mercy of a bunch of people that don't know anything about football. Because, I mean, they ranked Michigan at 3, and they've lost to the only 2 good teams they've played, and they almost were the 3rd seed. So, it's just one of those things.
I saw a great analogy. I think it was on a Michigan board, and I agree with this so much. Although this was more talking about Urban Meyer, it kind of applies to the Ohio State team in general. It's like Ohio State is like the team. It's like the person in class that doesn't show up to class half the time, doesn't do the homework, just doesn't care, gives it a half-assed effort, but still gets an A+ when the test comes around, when the exam comes around, because they're just that much smarter than everybody else, and they still soak in the information even though they're not putting any effort in. And that felt like, this feels like Ohio State right now with this team, because it's like you saw yesterday, they've been giving it half-assed effort all year long, especially on defense, but this team just has so much talent, and I feel like it can click, and maybe it did on Saturday, and maybe it will on Saturday against Northwestern. I think the offense is here to stay. I think what we're seeing is legit. They're showing some consistency now. It's just a question of if the defense truly believes in itself the way it did on Saturday, then I think this Ohio State team not only can get to the playoff, but will get to the playoff and will be a real threat to Alabama in the semifinal if that happens.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's just, it's one of those things where I'm excited for our guys. I'm excited for our program. I'm excited for, Shelley Meyer and the family. And it's just one of those things where you just feel good because, they've just been through so much this year. It's been like just a nonstop, like bullshit. I mean, between all the stuff off the field and, our best player getting hurt and declaring for the draft, which I completely understand. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I'm just really happy for these guys. They've been through a lot. They deserve it. And it's just been one of those years where, everything's still in front of them. I mean, that's all you can ask for, is that you still have a shot to fulfill your goals. And, I just hope that they can get it done.
Ohio State Northwestern, Big Ten championship on the line, a college football playoff appearance possibly on the line. We'll talk more about that later this week, of course. There's different scenarios. It basically looks like Ohio State or Oklahoma, barring an Alabama loss to Georgia this weekend. But we will definitely recap all of that next week with Kirk and Ross, and we'll talk about scenarios here later this week. Kirk, I appreciate you joining us. And of course, obviously, thanks to Ross, who was on as well. But we will definitely talk to you next week and discuss the Big Ten championship.
All right, brother. Good talking to you. See you, my man.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
All right, let's wrap up the Unscripted Ohio podcast here with a little bit of basketball talk for a few minutes. Ohio State playing Wednesday, 7:15 p.m. at the Value City Arena against Syracuse in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Syracuse comes in having lost a pair of games already out in Madison Square Garden. They lost to Connecticut, and then they lost to Oregon as well. This Syracuse team, obviously, the strength of their team is their 2-3 defense, and that's a little bit concerning just from the standpoint that Ohio State really struggled against the 2-3 zone employed by Samford last week. And that's concerning because, obviously Syracuse has more length in that zone. They practice it all the time. It's the strength of their team. They do it, and they do different types of 2-3-2, where Stanford was just kind of doing a loose 2-3 and playing back a little bit. Syracuse likes to extend it, and they do different things based on the shooters that are out on the floor and the personnel and everything. So it's going to be a tougher 2-3 than what Ohio State saw against Stanford, and they struggled against that zone. Now, that being said, the thing about a zone, unlike man defense, is if you get good ball movement, and Ohio State has had good ball movement for the most part this season, you can beat any type of zone pretty easily. You find the weak spots in the zone, and you can beat it a lot more than a good man defense. If you're facing a good man defense and they're just better than you, there's not much you can do about that. But you can pass your way out of a zone and get open shots and open looks. And that's why I do have some optimism about this game. There are many reasons why I have some optimism about this game, aside from the fact that I think Ohio State is a better team, and I think if they show up and play their game on Wednesday, I think that they will win. But the Syracuse team has a couple really good scorers. Tyus Battle averages 17 points a game as a junior. He's a 6'6 guard. But the problem with Syracuse is they have no depth. They are getting, something like 78% of their points from four guys. They're just not scoring outside of 3 or 4 of their starters. 3 starters alone make up 48 points out of the 71 that they average. So, you've shut down their primary scorers, and they've had a really big issue with scoring the ball this year. So I like Ohio State in this one. I think this is a good test at where Ohio State is at offensively. I think defensively, this team continues to improve. I said at the start of the season, after those first couple wins especially, I think this defense for Ohio State will wind up a top 15 efficiency when all is said and done. If you look at the Pomeroy ratings, they're already number 22 in efficiency, and that still is taking into account preseason expectations. I think if you look at the raw data, they are creeping up already into that top 15 range. So I think this will be a top 15, top 10 type of defense when all is said and done. They've just got to continue to be more consistent with the scoring. They're showing flashes, getting it out of Caleb Wesson, who is becoming an all-around great post player who can, shoot, who can take it put it on the floor a little bit. He's not real comfortable doing that, but he's shown the ability to do it a little more lately. Keyshawn Woods has got to be consistent. C.J. Jackson, of course, has got to be consistent. But they've got a lot of guys now that can score. It's just a matter of putting it all together and being consistent. But Ohio State will have another big test on Wednesday as it tries to continue to improve. And it's going to have a brutal Big Ten schedule coming up. 20 games this year on the Big Ten slate. And the league is as deep as I've ever seen it. I do think it's going to get 8, 9, maybe even 10 teams in the NCAA tournament. I would bet on 8 right now with the possibility of 9. But the league is very deep. It goes legitimately 11 to 12 deep into top 50 type of territory. So every game that Ohio State plays on the road this year in the conference is going to be a tough, tough test, and there are going to be a lot of tough home games as well. So it's important for Ohio State to close out the non-conference schedule, getting this win against Syracuse, and then getting the neutral floor win in December against UCLA. That'll be important. Get those wins out of the way so you have yourself a lot of buffer zone for a very tough league schedule. But I think Ohio State gets it done. As I said, this game will be on ESPN2, 7:15 tip on Wednesday night. We will talk about it on the Friday podcast. As well, on Friday, we will preview Northwestern, Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship. our interns on BuckeyeGrove.com, Cam and Andy, will be along. We'll touch base with them, what they thought of the season, their favorite interviews, some of the highlights and lowlights of the season, and their internships and their first chance covering the Ohio State football team. We'll get a sense of how they felt about that as well on Friday. And as I said, we'll talk about Ohio State and Syracuse on Wednesday and how that game plays out. Follow me on Twitter at KYLam8. Of course, you can listen to the show every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can also follow us, subscribe, rate, review us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. We'll be back at you again Friday to preview the Big Ten title game. Ohio State trying to get into the college football playoff. They have that chance on Saturday night on Fox, if they can get it done against Northwestern. So catch us again Friday. I hope everybody has a good week. We'll be back at you later this week. Thanks, guys, for listening. Guys and gals, talk to you again soon.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.